This is the Open University. Today we begin with a program linked to Unit 16 of the course Personality and Learning.
Six more songs, bloody hell, how does he do it? The hardest working failed artists in show business, back with 6 new songs, and I think probably my EP, inverted commas, is finished. I think it's probably, it's only lacking a kind of existentialist spy theme in terms of the types of songs that each of my albums has. Maybe that's too much of a formula already, but I love I love a torch song about sort of slightly creepy spy type things, because I was born in the 1960s. Inevitably, John Barry, Morricone, Baccarat, all that stuff. So I haven't done one of those, and I feel like I haven't sung. I think there's some good singing in the backing vocals on this album. Some of the lead vocals are just kind of me, just sounds like me. I just think, oh, that's a song by me. So this batch started with Lawyers, a song called Lawyers, and I want a sprightly little number that's maybe recapping some of the themes on the rejected Sichuan song, because I didn't enjoy listening to that Sichuan song, but it had this kind of theme of 1-800 I Can Sue, where I see a kind of apocalyptic scenario of everybody in the West anyway being at each other's throats, and basically identity politics turning everybody against everybody, men against women, straights against, or feminists against transgender people, etc., etc. So what should have been a fantastic intersectional allydom, or whatever we call it, turns into a huge Sue fest, a kind of toxic legal quagmire in which everyone sinks together, and the lawyers are the only ones who benefit. So in this song I imagined a sort of doomsday scenario in which only lawyers are left at the end of the world because everyone else has sued each other to death. Entirely relevant in terms of my own life. I mean, I won't go into detail, but even teachers at my school are being pursued in legal action just now, and there's a certain pressure to get involved in litigation like that because it's progressive, and litigation has a role to play in expanding human rights and showing up injustices and all the rest of it. I'm entirely happy with activist shareholders and activist lawyers and people like that using those procedures. At the same time, I don't want to dedicate years of my life to trying to get reparation for some kind of injustice against me when I was a child. God knows there were injustices. My school was a dreadful place. It's been sort of held against me for having gone to a posh private school, being sent, against my will, and tried to escape many times and go on hunger strike to be taken away from this dreadful place. But it's also, it was in itself a miserable experience, and then it's held against you as well, in addition, because you're seen as privileged. In fact, it was the opposite. A boarding school like that was the opposite of privilege. Anyway, this was Lawyers was a lighter, more sprightly approach to this 1-800 I Can Sue theme. And it continues the safetyism theme, because a lot of people are exaggerating their sense of unsafety for compensation. Actually, this started off in a dream. I think I woke up one morning with this line, I'm the king of the crime. So it was actually going to be a song, a kind of musical theatre number, Sweeney Todd or something, Stephen Sondheim, about being the king of crime. But then it turns out to be about law instead, the law and lawyers instead of criminals. So I kind of crossed the line there. And I imagined a child saying to his father, what were you doing in the toxic apocalypse, Daddy? What was your role in this meltdown? I was suing, son. Oh, this was a verse I didn't use in the song. Suing when I could have been singing somewhere on an island on the bank of an idyllic inlet, and now I'm going to sue you too, little bastard, little insect. So it was actually a much more hard-hitting song, but with the breezy kind of backing that I ended up going with, it couldn't really have such intensely toxic lyrics. So I just sort of sketched it as vague science fiction, a kind of extrapolation and a continuation of some tendencies which I see around me today. Of course, I have enormous admiration for the harmoniousness and the friendliness of Asia in terms of collectivism and people actually all being much more of a team, and never ever suing, well, very rarely suing each other. There is political activism in Japan on all sorts of levels, but it's people don't tend to just take other people to court because they get angry. The Wagatha Christie and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of pathetic. It really shows up our pathetic lack of morality. The morality particularly not of standing for yourself and your own themes and your own interests, but of standing for other people. In other words, the morality of solidarity. This is something individualism in the West has really made us bad at. End of sermon. Yeah, that song, it kind of had parallels with, I had a song called Belvedere, in which it imagined an awful dystopia in which children throw their parents, or help the inner party elites to throw their parents off the great mountain of death. And there's all sorts of horrible goings on in that song. Also Un-America, which shows there's a sports goods store in this novel I wrote called Un-America in 2014, in which lots of practices, I hope they're not used by anyone, they're ultra-capitalist or post-slave kind of practices where in the American South people are selling sporting goods by all sorts of underhand means. So these are like negative, dystopias really. And of course, Year Zero, my song in 2016 about how Brexit was bringing out this toxic divisiveness within the UK. Really, there is no end in sight for this toxic divisiveness. The Brexit thing rumbles on, although the word has become rather taboo in British politics. People are scared to even mention the B word. Children sue their parents, parents counter-sue, people sue teachers and vice versa, politicians sue the electorate for voting incoherently, which would actually be a lawsuit I would get behind. Who knows where it would lead though. Maybe that is what politics is a constant kind of undeclared lawsuit by the politicians against us. And in the end, only the lawyers win. So, I think we probably all could agree that only the lawyers really profit from all this stuff. Simultaneously the apogee and the nadir of Western individualism. So then I'd been working already that week on Art Creep, because that was kind of hit, and it's got 20,000 views on YouTube, and everybody liked in 2015 when I published this song, The Art Creep. Was it 2015? I think so. Because I just moved into my new flat in Osaka. And The Art Creep describes me, which I really did. I went to a shrine festival and I was videoing the fantastic bell rhythms and things that they use when they do the portable shrine. The god is moving on at the end of that song because it's a portable god. It's literally what you do when you carry a shrine. The young men of the community carry the local god shrine, Mikoshi, on their shoulders, sometimes in a very violent way, and there's a guy on the top trying to stay on when they're trying to topple him. And so that was a song I really liked. It had worked out really well, the sort of funky rhythms, and also the guilty lyric about somebody condemning himself for cultural appropriation, essentially. Which is not, I think, high, it doesn't rank high for me in the list of crimes, especially not with things which are non-physical. So if you just take ideas from other cultures and integrate them, I don't think that's cultural appropriation. Sure, if you take actual artifacts like the bronzes from Benin, which the German ethnographic museums have just returned to Benin, sure, that's theft, but it's never theft if you take ideas and influences and inspiration from other cultures. That's called communication. That's what we do when we're artists and making culture. It's not just for your local religious ceremonies, it's also to make a statement, a universal statement to the world. So I wanted to revisit, in the classic style of David Bowie revisiting Major Tom with Ashes to Ashes, or even Buddy Holly revisiting Peggy Sue with Peggy Sue Got Married, which apparently Bowie based the idea of Major Tom, of Ashes to Ashes on, the idea of going back to an early song and giving you the follow-up. What's the story with these characters? Major Tom's up in space, he's somehow still alive, feeding off the energy of either drugs or the sort of natural drugs of radiation and illumination in space. But my art creep has hanged himself from the gallery wall in a guilty biennial. Of course, this has been a big theme this year. We had 3 guilty biennials, each one more guilty than the last. I think in a way it's probably the culmination of a theme. I don't think we'll see many more of these because really it's a theme which has been exhausted, the theme of middle-class guilt. The missing middle is something they talk about, this idea of a bourgeois, bohemian, liberal middle class. It's actually very embattled from both sides of the political spectrum right now, either the sort of fascists or the leftists. Both really hate this class, and this class is expected when it goes to see art on the walls of galleries to also be wearing a hair shirt and talking about its own historic crimes and all the rest of it. So I think there's a limit, a breaking point at which this class will say, listen, I have compassion fatigue. I don't want any more guilty biennials. So the art creep, I guess he didn't experience compassion fatigue, he just killed himself. So it's a kind of requiem for this poor guilty guy. Today's guilty biennials have a quest to give visibility to others, to the oppressed half of every binary, and they could be seen to be actually appropriating and orientalizing in their own way, because one of the weird things is that you actually experience a lot of other people's cultures and a lot of a sense of the goodness of the other. You don't see the bad side of the other, except in the conflicts which then emerge. For instance, Kadiratia, the curator of the Berlin Biennial, had this huge conflict with some Iraqi artists, fellow Muslim artists. He's from Algeria, but he's a French citizen. His grandfather was a liberation fighter in the Algerian War of Independence, but some Iraqi artists objected to him using images of Abu Ghraib in the Berlin Biennial and withdrew, and other progressive artists, as they saw themselves, withdrew in solidarity from this biennial. So there was a conflict. You see a lot of the conflicts of the narcissism of minor difference. We keep using that term, but it's a very useful idea from Freud, that the most murderous differences are the smallest ones, where you're separated from your colleagues or your fellow travellers just by a hair's breadth, and that's where you really have these awful squabbles. And this is why identity politics is used so effectively as a divide and rule strategy by the governing class of oligarchs and awful fascists, which we have just now. So this poor art creep, in a way, perhaps you could see through all this guilty biennial stuff, that in a way it makes the original artists, the people like the torturers at Abu Ghraib or the lynchers, in the US, which are being displayed in a lot of exhibitions now. Artists are simply reframing atrocities, historic atrocities from the colonial period, for instance, and making, in a sense, the colonizers the artists, because it's sort of performance art. You could see the colonial period as a huge act of performance art. That's one of the conclusions you could draw from this biennial, that violence is somehow sexy. You can aestheticize violence. You can actually celebrate at the same time as condemning. This is always the danger. How do you make something ugly and unappealing when it was historically ugly and unappealing? But if you put it in an art context, it starts to look sexy. That's a real problem. There are ugly conflicts like the Kadiratia conflict, but the way to get into these biennials is to be a lesbian Indonesian, and they have all the fun. So that's sort of my funny follow-up to a funny song, but also dealing with a serious theme. And it's not a terribly successful song. It's not one of the best songs, but I think it's funny to reapproach that. Self-identity, a lot of this is grappling with identity politics and gender politics and all the rest of it, which recently, I check Twitter to see what people are saying about Momus and retweet strategically, or my assistant does. I don't do any of this, but my assistant, Maria Wolonsky, told me that there had been a huge battle amongst gay gamers, young gay gamers, mostly in the US, about a character called Bridget. God knows, thank God Maria just looks after all this stuff and I don't have to think about it. But Maria told me that Bridget is a character in Guilty Gear, created in 2002 by Daisuke Ishiwatari, both a kind of manga character and a fighting game character. And there's a new version of this, Guilty Gear Strive, which came out in 2021 with PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Windows, blah, 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 and Japanese arcades. And it's the subheading is Flying Unrestrained with Yo-Yo Mastery, Freeform, Tricky Spinner. This is the character of Bridget, a tricky spinner. And there was this huge conflict because Bridget apparently transitioned from a male to female. And there were the gaming community, some of them, one of them was called Momus, called himself Momus. A lot of people on Twitter call themselves Momus in various permutations. And there was this huge debate with this Momus saying that Bridget was and always will be a boy. And even this was in the bio, the Twitter bio of this person. And then there's a huge pile-on, a kind of attack, a wasp nest, hornet's nest attack on this person saying, obviously Bridget is a girl, is a woman, and has changed gender. And then even the creator, Daisuke, waded in to say, yes, so you should use the female pronoun. And all this against the backdrop of the Ukraine war and, much more serious issues. And I just thought, how are these people so obsessed and preoccupied with a fictional character's fictional gender orientation? This is really the way the world ends, isn't it? Not with a bang, but this kind of whimpering. But self-identity, the song Self-Identity, I don't know, sometimes a song is a way to think in the most childish way possible, philosophically, so you can actually come to some quite interesting conclusions just by thinking things through in really simple language. I think this happened in I Want You But I Don't Need You, and it happens in this Self-Identity song as well, because I just thought, well, let's take the childish self-assertion of I am whatever I say I am, including my gender, my orientation, all the rest of it. Let's take that, because I'm not sure if I believe that. I think of course we can say what we are and people can and should respect that statement, but we can't control how other people perceive us. None of us have the control over either our avatars online or the effect we have in the world, out there in the real world, to determine how other people perceive us. Of course, it's a question of good manners that we go along with other people's self-projections, but just like art, the intentional fallacy in art says that the author's intentions, what I'm saying now are my intentions, actually don't matter that much, because it's what you take from the songs that really matters. So some people from this song, and it's the same with the intentional fallacy of identity, is that that my views as the individual involved of who I am are the only thing that matters. Of course they're not. It's an act of collaboration between the projector of those avatars and the consumer of those avatars, just as it is in art. So I think the Self-Identity song, laid out being whoever you say you are, but then actually this obsession with your own interests and your own identity cutting you off from other people, from other people's perceptions of you, but also other people who are struggling to assert their own particular views of who they are, who they should be. So you don't have the intersectionality and the alliedom that you expect or deserve, because, as in the song, the character who's asserted in this naively simple way who he or she is, boy or girl or something else, could be anything, is being chased by people with sharpened sticks, i.e. this sort of Twitter lynch mob. And then the person who he should be or she should be in solidarity with is also being chased with their own little group of angry trolls on Twitter. So there isn't intersectionality. And but some people, of course, will not. I think because it sounds very positive, it's got a very fast skittling beat, skiffling. Some people love this song because I think they do believe that you can be whatever you say you are. It's a message David Bowie kind of gave us. I think I'm a bit more culturally deterministic, though. I don't really believe we can escape from other people's preconceptions, for better or worse. So I think Benny Hill, of course, features. I'm going to run out soon of sort of politically incorrect historical British comedians to use in these songs. I just by chance I found this Benny Hill sketch where he's a man and a woman. He's a man from the top up and from the waist up, and then a woman from the waist down, which would just be a sort of saucy postcard kind of style of humour at the time. But then he becomes, for me, a symbol of gender ambivalence and bimorphism and all the rest of it. So, and then he's being chased. So it just seemed to fit the song. And also there's some amazing dance routines with what were they called, Pants People. Well, it's a bit later than Pants People, they changed their name to something else, Hot Gossip or something, dancing also in the video. And then there's me using the new feature in the iOS 14 where you can isolate a figure. Amazing, sort of suddenly just with your finger on a photograph, you can isolate a figure and cut and paste it, drop it into a different background. So this seemed to be a symbol technologically of how easily we can update our avatars and put them in new contexts. That's that song, and lots of people liked it. It was like the hit, a hit of the album. Then there was the song Queerness, staying on the same theme really. This came out of a real episode where I was walking along Kastanienallee here in Berlin, and some British tourists, some boys, looked like kind of sports fans. I don't know who they were like 20-year-old, early 20s, and they just said, "What the fuck?" One of them said, "What the fuck?" as I walked by. Christ knows why. I think I might have been looking a little bit fruity that day or something, but I try to dress to impress. I do present my avatar out there in the world and try to look interesting. As said before, it's to summon an idea of a parallel world in people's minds when they see me. What is the world in which that person fits? Where has that person come from? And where is the parallel world in which that is normality? That's always very interesting for me to think about. Gosh, it's getting dark. I keep getting different lighting here. Scintillating lighting. I had, there's this expression in French, l'esprit de l'escalier, when you, at the bottom of the staircase, the response suddenly comes to the witticism that you've been barbed by. You've been at dinner and somebody's said something witty that's a bit of a put down, and you think of the ideal riposte, but you only think of it like 20 minutes too late or 2 hours too late. So into my head popped, as a kind of response to these boys, "You're not in England now." I was thinking, come on, this is Berlin. You can look strange here and nobody gives a damn. This is why even Bowie and Iggy Pop could ponce about in Berlin and nobody gave them any stress. So I said, I was thinking, EasyJet or Ryanair? Which of those budget airlines have you guys flown in on from your part just to have your weekend party here in Berlin and insult other British people? They probably didn't even think I was another British person. They probably thought, what strange, as in Brave New World, what strange creatures are here, revealed, whatever it is, that Shakespeare quote. Gosh, I think I did that. And, was it Ryanair or EasyJet, you little British narrow-minded creeps have flown in on? So Queerness, it sort of sounds a bit like the Poison Boyfriend, or it sounds a bit like, my old style. I played it on the guitar. I'd also been to this really interesting exhibition at CO Berlin, which is called Queerness, and it featured a lot of Tilda Swinton, who's the same age as me, in Sally Potter's film Orlando, where she plays a gender-switching time traveller who pops up at various different times in British history, English history, to sort of to have affairs with people and have fun and narrate. And so the film was part of the exhibition, but just a lot of pictures also of transvestites in the 1960s dressing up as American housewives, who famously Andy Warhol said were the people who were doing more drugs than his factory scene. Was it Warhol said that, or somebody, maybe Malanga or somebody, or Lou Reed? I think Lou Reed maybe. And so Queerness really, it's a category larger than a simple sexual orientation. I do identify as queer. Oh, the wooden tongue has reached even me. I sort of see myself as a queer person. I'm familiar with that term really from a slightly older period. So obviously I couldn't claim to be trans, although I see people out there on the internet as saying Kurt Cobain was trans. This is the new kind of meme amongst certain people that I know. Just because he was aware of feminist or post-feminist issues, he was somehow trans already. I don't accept that. I think it's just silly. But I do see queerness or campness in the Susan Sontag kind of way as a wider category than simply something to do with gay people, lesbians, whatever. At this exhibition, though, I have to say I was super impressed. There were some lesbians with mullets, kind of the shaved head type mullet, where it's sort of long at the back and then really shaved, and then they were really well dressed. And I thought, I've come to a place where I recognise really cool people. And also they were all sort of hanging around near a photo booth downstairs. They checked me out, and in a nice way. I sensed anyway that they, unlike the British boys on the Castagnan Alley, these were people who said, wow, that guy looks interesting, and he looks like, is he one of ours? Or, I mean, I couldn't be a lesbian. Well, it might be, I suppose. But I kind of sensed, these are my people. I really got that feeling, the kind of feeling I would have expected to get at the David Bowie Is exhibition back in 2013. But I didn't. I kind of thought everyone's going to look at me in this Bowie exhibition and say, there's someone who's been Bowieized. But of course, everybody in that audience had been Bowieized in their own way. That was the interesting thing. Maybe we've all been queerized in some way as well. So anyway, yeah, I was quite happy with this. The song was really done... How was it composed? There was some really weird... I think I just played randomly the chords on the guitar and then sort of chopped it up until I got something interesting. So there are lots of interesting moments just musically where it goes through some unexpected key changes and things like that in the middle of the chorus. So actually in the later take, I put a version on YouTube early, then I thought there was a beautiful thing it does where it sort of says duffer uppers, something others, or that bit... what the fuck is duffer uppers? That bit I repeated again, copied and pasted it in to come back again as if that was the chorus, because I really liked what happened musically in that bit. And the next song was the Queerness song, which turned out really well. I think I love this song most of all the songs. Queerness has been a big influence on me. I guess I discovered him through David Bowie when I was about 20. Bowie had been going on about Die Brücke, this group of expressionist painters here in Berlin. Kirchner lived out in Stieglitz kind of area, out in the west, near where Kafka lived as well when he came to Berlin. It was very, very late in his life. And Kirchner was, he wasn't well-travelled at all. He only really lived in Berlin, Dresden and Switzerland. And but his imagination was completely full of ethnographic kind of imaginations, which he'd picked up really from ethnographic museums in Berlin. But he lived in this primitive style, I guess influenced a bit by Paul Gauguin and the Fauve painters in France. The idea of a kind of, and Picasso and Braque and all these people who are using African masks. So African and Oceanic and in the Indonesian kind of primitive, in inverted commas, styles were very important to these artists. So I was like that very much when I was 20 or so as well. I was imagining a life on Bali. In fact, I think I was writing a novel set. I went to the University Library in Edinburgh and sat there writing this novel, which was never finished or never appeared when I was in my early 20s. About life on Bali, and of course I've still never been to Bali to this day. I'd like to go to Bali, although I wouldn't find the Bali that I was imagining. That's the important thing. Kirchner, he also spent a lot of time on this island in the Baltic Sea, just the very north of Germany where it's almost Denmark, and living with his girlfriend Elna and various acolytes, friends, assistants, students, because he was trying to set up his own art school, unsuccessfully in the end. And he was sent off, he volunteered to be a soldier, to be a driver in the war in order to avoid being a soldier in the war, but he was very stressed and traumatized, and this is when he painted himself with the missing right hand, saying, I can't be an artist. That's a visual symbol of not being allowed to be an artist because the world is so full of stupid conflicts. Okay, the Archduke got assassinated, now we all have to go to war. Kaiser Bill dragging Germany into the First World War, and everybody rejoicing and thinking, oh, this is great. Magnus Hirschfeld has a great take on this, which is that people have a basic sadistic urge in which they mix violence and sex together, and so there's a sexual thrill at the idea of war, where you could do all sorts of atrocities and have sexual congress that you couldn't have during peacetime. So maybe that's also what's going on in the Ukraine. Who knows? It's all this weird stuff. What is going on in Putin's subconscious, you know? It's always difficult, as long as there are conflicts, it's always difficult to be an artist. An artist is an occupation of peacetime. So Kirchner, he couldn't drive ambulances and things anymore because he got paralysed hands and feet. He was drinking heavily, he was drugging himself with laudanum. he went to live in Switzerland in Davos for the rest of his life, but he shot himself in 1938. So the last line in this song is, "I'll shoot myself if there's another war." He thought that Switzerland was going to fall, just like Austria had had an Anschluss with Nazi Germany. He thought Switzerland was going to follow. He was wrong, a bit like Walter Benjamin. He could have survived if he hadn't shot himself at the Spanish border, also fleeing the Nazis. All these, or Anton Webern, who was shot by an American cook, actually, shot by the other side, shot by our side. Lots of the victims, unnecessary victims of war, who were fantastic artists in the 20th century. So this song, Kirchner, really just narrates episodes from his life. I always think of Blackout. The period when Bowie lived in Berlin was his most Kirchner-like. Bowie always talked about Erich Heckel, as his favourite of the Die Brücke artists. There's a Brücke Museum, which was one of Bowie's favourite places here in Berlin, to go and look at the paintings and get inspiration for his own painting. He would paint Michelin and Eddie Pop and people in the style of Die Brücke, a bit like Emil Nolde kind of style or something. Vibrant colours, but by that point already 80 years out of date at the very least. But I always think that Kirchner looks more like Bowie, and there's a better parallel there. Kirchner, it's kind of sexual looseness to Kirchner as well, which I've always responded to, and the idea of sexual liberation by being like primitive people. So hanging out naked on the beach of this island. Fairman, or what, I forget what it's called, but he went to Davos, and he was the Nazis used his paintings in the decadent, degenerate art exhibition, which toured extensively and was meant to be holding up for ridicule modern artists. The Nazis did not like modern art, so Kirchner was very hurt by that. He believed his reputation was being trashed for all time. Little did he know that in 2014 one of his smaller paintings would go for 7 million euros at an art fair. He, a bit like Van Gogh, really, he was a sort of failure in his life, and probably considered himself, when he put the bullet in his head in 1938, that he'd failed, but he hadn't. He continues to burn bright for some of us. So there's a song now about him, musically it started as We Have All the Time in the World. I'm obsessed with this song. John Barry, Louis Armstrong. The fact that it's so ironic, because Louis Armstrong didn't have all the time in the world. He had only a very short time to live after he recorded that. But it was a Bond theme, probably my favourite of the Bond themes, really, because of the irony, the heavy irony of the lyric, really, that we don't live twice. We don't have all the time in the world. So I started with the chords of that. You can't go wrong in some ways with certain collections of chords, but even if you put them in a totally different order. So that's really what I did. I did a kind of cover of We Have All the Time in the World, and then chopped it up and put it in a totally different order, and then started making up my own chords and altering it even more. So by the time I'd finished, it evolved away, but it's still at 90 BPM, which is the same speed as We Have All the Time in the World. It's funny, there's a sort of soul-sucking thing going on where you try to... Some of the magic, some of the glitter and tinsel of the original might be preserved in your take, even if you change absolutely everything, or almost everything. Somehow the spirit of an amazing song makes whatever you create from it amazing. Also, it's a bit like... the Kirchner song ended up a bit like Tears for Fears if Leonard Cohen was the singer, because it's got that sort of 80s revisiting the Beatles with big production values kind of feel to it, with the big drums and everything. But also there's a little bit of Suzanne, the Leonard Cohen song Suzanne, and the melody on the top line melody on the vocal. So I really love that, and I think it's probably my favourite of the songs on the album. And then the final one, and lots of warm analog synth sounds as well, which I always like. The final one is called My Wife Will Soon Forget Me. And this came from a Japanese porn title. I didn't even watch the film, but I just thought, My Wife Will Soon Forget Me. Well, how is that possible to justify as a title? This is often a way a song can almost write itself in your imagination. You see something that has a certain dynamism in it because it doesn't seem to make sense, or it seems to make the wrong kind of sense, or it's kind of surreal. This one had a mixture of humour and pathos. My wife will soon forget me. Someone who's a cuckold, who's narrating. Why is he telling the story in the first place if it's so humiliating? Is there some upside, something positive to his wife forgetting him? So I began to write this lyric, and it just sort of flowed. It just sort of came out, really. It was about 5 in the morning. I woke up and I just had this title. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting title. So it just flowed out, the lyric, and I sort of imagined the world in which that sentiment made sense. And it's a bit like Brel's song Le Moribond, which was Terry Jacks, translated badly as Terry Jacks' Seasons in the Sun. It's actually, in the original French, much more acerbic song about he's going to die, someone who knows he's going to die. Written in 1961, so this was before Brel's cancer and all the rest of it. He knows he's going to die. He's taking leave of his friends, the priest, his best friend, his worst enemy, who's the lover of his wife. A bit ironic from Brel, really, because he'd abandoned his wife to go and have a music career in Paris and was having his own affairs and things. But in a way, some people think this song is a way to get back at his wife for having affairs. But he basically he even wants the lover to take care of his wife when he's gone. So there's a kind of sense of life itself continuing after you're no longer there. And what other songs? I don't know. That was the sort of positive I could find. A Buddhist kind of sense of all things must pass, and that's natural, and thank God for forgetting as well, because to be forgotten might be a blessing. Of course, artists, I couldn't bear to be forgotten, is something Bowie said, and you want to keep contributing and you want to be noted and remembered and liked and loved and all the rest of it, but at the same time it's not the end of the world if you're not, and by the end of the world none of us will be remembered. Even David Bowie will be forgotten, because there won't be humans anymore. There won't be, who knows, perhaps the artificial intelligences on distant planets will still have databases about David Bowie, but is that remembering? I'm not sure. So yeah, we're all destined to be forgotten, and in a way this is part of nature's mechanism for renewing itself, and it's crucial. So this is, it's a little bit also like my song Huge, which has this idea that post-love, post-intensity, because I'm very ambivalent about intensity, the intensity of love. A lot of anti-love songs in my oeuvre, where love is seen as a negative thing because it takes you over, it obsesses you, and it actually then reduces in size and importance all the other things which make life worth living. So when you come out of love, sometimes those other things reassume their true dimensions. The video, of course, is playing with dimensions because I'm a huge character on the horizon, simultaneously in my room and in nature, because I filmed in Traptoa, in the airport, Tempelhof Airport, which is now a park. And I suppose there's also this a British music hall feeling, obviously, to the music. I've been poring over a database of British music hall songs, and so many of them are about my wife this, my wife that. So I thought this would be a nice kind of a music hall song, a bit like also Midnight Sun on the Smudger album, where you look at really the darkest possibility of your own disappearance, but try to see an upside to that, a positive sense to that. So that's pretty much all the album, and I'm going to head back to Paris now and do some other travels, maybe go to Lisbon, maybe go to Asia eventually. Since it's reopened, Japan is open again, let's all go to Japan. So I'll see you there.
Open University. A shortened version of a 50-minute film first transmitted as part of a general service series called Space Between Words, and it's a study of communication and non-communication.